everybody. Good morning, Ernesto.
Good morning, Paul. How are you doing?
Doing good, doing good. Another
Great.
beautiful Saturday morning. Hot, but it's sunny. Well, the sun's trying to get through the smoke. It's smoky again. But anyway, well, not much we can do about that.
Yep.
We're at I lost count last week, and I'm going to lose count again. I think today this is number 38 or 39. Guess it doesn't make that much of a difference. It's Saturday, October 24th. I'm sure of that. And well, obviously the big topic, or the topic of this week, has to be a summary and an analysis and reflection of the election results from last Sunday's elections. Anybody who's watching this probably knows at this point that the big winner was Luis Arce Wins, the MAS candidate. And there were the elections themselves. They didn't have there's no big news there. I think that the one major news point there, that might be worth mentioning, was that the electoral authority, the night before the election, announced they were going to not use or broadcast the official quick count, and that raised some alarm, I think, with the DIREPRE, right? That's what that was called. That's the name they used.
DIREPRE.
Yeah, for the software they were going to use. However, they explained reasons that we don't have to get into, and were very transparent as to why this was the case. I guess they were having problems with it. And my suspicion is they waited and tried to do everything they could to work out the glitches until the last minute. And when they realized that wasn't going to be possible, they decided it'd be better to use it. Besides that, everything was pretty uneventful on Sunday. The numbers give, at this point, with the official count completed, Arce with 55%, which is a landslide, because Mesa came in at 29%. I'm rounding to the nearest percentage. And Camacho was 14%. 55 for Arce, 29 for Mesa, and 14 for Camacho. Luis Fernando Camacho. In terms of the Senate and House, or the legislature, this will be the first time in about 10 years that the MAS hasn't had a 2/3 or absolute majority, which I think is a good thing, definitely. They still maintain a simple majority with well over 50% in both the Senate and the House, but they don't have the absolute majority, which they would need to do all kinds of things they were, how do you say, mal acostumbrados, maniobras, things they do before, and with basically power to do whatever they wanted. So that's not going to be so much the case anymore. The aftermath, the immediate reactions to this, within the MAS, obviously they were happy. I don't know how surprised they were. I think everybody's surprised. The opposition candidates recognized within 24 hours of the exit polling, giving the MAS the unquestionable victory, recognized their defeat, and congratulated Arce for his win. We did see in this last week a major flood in social media of fake news and all kinds of claims that there was, once again, election fraud, mostly coming from, at least what I saw was coming from Santa Cruz and from the right, the right wing, the how do you say, the Unión Juvenil Cruceñista, we'll just call them the UJC. Even UJC is kind of hard to say. UJC doesn't flow very well. But unfounded, completely unfounded. Even the Comité Cívico, with their lawyer, the people, it was, for me, they became a laughing stock. They tried to present, in a PowerPoint presentation, showing discrepancies between the tally counts from a table, in the official tally count report from a voting table, and then saying that from a different source, it was entirely different. It was an entirely different result from the same table, when what they were doing was comparing the results from that table in 2019, last year, to the results this year in 2020. I mean, it's just ridiculous. The claims of election fraud are baseless at this point. There's observations of minor irregularities or discrepancies, but nothing systematic, nothing that I would call overwhelming, even in the slightest sense, that should lead us to believe that there was any kind of fraud. And the UJC tried to call a general strike for starting today, or midnight last night, I guess you could say. An absolute failure. Thankfully, everything's normal. I drove in from Satélite Norte in the north, and things are business as usual,
Great.
which I think is good. Common sense has won in this case.
Uh-huh.
In terms of Arce's reaction in public statements that he's made, I'm cautiously hopeful. I'm not going to say I'm optimistic at this point, but he's clearly stated that Evo Morales will not be part of his government. He's stated that he wants to renew or put new faces into his cabinet positions, and in terms of tackling the economic crisis on three fronts, basically the three things he's mentioned: a bono for a stipend of 1,000 bolivianos, the equivalent of about $150, right off the bat, which was proposed already previously, but of course, under Anya's, excuse me, the MAS legislature was not going to approve the funding. And so anyway, that's one point. Lowering the value-added tax is a second point, and a wealth tax he's been kind of vague about, defining parameters of how that wealth is going to be defined. And that I think is a very controversial point, and a lot of people are a bit concerned about what consequences that could bring in terms of scaring off foreign investment, or even locals, Bolivians or permanent residents that taking their money elsewhere. But we'll have to see, because again, he's been very vague about the parameters for creating that a tax like that. Evo's reaction has been, and just closing on the point with Arce is that he also said that Evo, if he comes back, he's going to be busy dealing with his legal issues, which I was surprised by. Have him make a statement like that. But anyway, the point being that even now with the landslide victory, it seems that Arce, at least, and many within the party, are keeping Evo Morales at arm's length and maintaining distance, which I think honestly is a wise thing. Evo's reaction to the results, before the results were known, he said he'd be back in Bolivia the next day. That hasn't been the case. If the MAS were to win, the classic statement: he's done with politics and will take up agriculture and fish farming in the Chapare, and whenever he comes back. And according to him, all the cases against him, there's criminal charges and charges of terrorism, sedition, statutory rape, and election fraud. According to him, those cases will all fall apart very soon. That's yet to be seen. And just this morning, he took off from Argentina to Venezuela for reasons unknown. So that's where we're at. In closing, my take on the whole situation, Ernesto, before I give you the floor here, and is that at least in my own, self-reflection, or whatever you want to call it, my own biases caused me to lose sight of what the objective was in October and November of last year, which were basically, the objective was to get Evo out of office, not necessarily to cut off his last term early, but to assure that he wouldn't be that he wouldn't continue in office after that, and that those 20% in the polls or in the surveys before the elections that said they didn't know or they weren't going to respond, it seems that all went to the Mas. I was hopeful that a good chunk of that would go to Mesa, and that doesn't seem to be the case. Definitely the economy has, with the pandemic, has got a lot of people concerned and hurting financially. And I think Arce was a sound bet on the part of the Mas, putting an economist, a well studied economist in the position of the presidential candidacy. And is something you mentioned last week with the tremendous corruption scandals that we've gone through with the Áñez administration that hurt the opposition, or when I say opposition, I mean the non-Mas candidates in general. I think a lot of people said, it's better to stick with the with the devil,
Right.
And so that's the way I see things at this point. I'm not going to say I'm optimistic, but I'm hopeful that Arce and the Mas have learned from some of their major mistakes, and that things can be better than they were in the past under Evo, in terms of the divisive rhetoric, political persecution, and an absolutely rotted out judiciary. We'll see, I guess. Your turn.
We'll see. Thank you. We'll see. I'll start by mentioning that we did follow up all the previous polls before the election, as many other analysts did in Bolivia, and nobody really ever thought that the final outcome could be reality. Most polls showed that actually the Mas was first, and that's a truism, like they say, Yep. The Mas has been the first one in every one of the polls, but it was the first one within a distance that was not too big to the 3 percentage points with regard to Carlos Mesa. So the distance was so close that many people, or even this guy that foresees the future, Ramses, he foresaw that finally in the final outcome, Mesa could win the election. Well, it never happened because it wasn't supposed to happen. The polls were right. Number one was the Mas, and number two was Carlos Mesa. But no poll ever showed the big gap between those two. As I said, the average was 3 or 4 percentage points, and that was it. They went like in a zigzag, going up and down, but basically within that distance, never 10 points or 15 points or 20 points apart. We did discuss a week ago with Carlos Valderrama the fact that there were 21% of undecided people, and I don't know, it wasn't a fact then, but the perception that the people that were undecided were basically Masistas that didn't want to reveal what they were going to do in the election. The only people that had a reason to hide the vote vis-a-vis somebody that came to do a poll was the Masistas, because as we said, in La Paz, nobody that was going to vote for the Mas had to hide the vote, or nobody that was going to vote for Carlos Mesa had a reason to hide that fact. But in Santa Cruz, yes, many people in Santa Cruz, Masistas, would never tell you that they were Masistas, because it was like a sin in Santa Cruz. In Santa Cruz, the extreme right overtook the political discourse, and the political discourse was absolutely overwhelmingly against the Mas. And so the Masistas wouldn't reveal their political preference. So I think that became true at the end of the whole process, that all those indices, well, this is important to point out. I never thought that the 21% of indecisos would vote for the MAS. As we spoke before, I thought that a great amount of those were going to vote for the MAS, but I never thought that the 21% of undecided were going to vote for the MAS. It ended up being pretty much like all the undecided, or most of overwhelmingly went for the MAS. And that's something very suspicious, because I don't know, I'm not a statistician, nothing close to that, but I would like to speak with somebody that has that background, because it doesn't make sense to me that all of them, or 90% of them, would vote for the MAS. I think I would have thought that the final end of those people would be more spread out in the political spectrum than concentrating on one candidate. But maybe it is correct, and so that's what happened. So I just wanted to mention that our previous analysis wasn't that bad compared to many other analyses that were done in the Bolivian media, because many people didn't really think about the 21%. They just said, oh, you know, that's big and what will happen. But nobody really said that's going to be the MAS and the reason behind that logic, why you would have thought that most of the 21% would vote for the MAS. That wasn't analyzed too much in Bolivia. And that's a shame, because it was pretty obvious, in my opinion, that could have happened. It did happen. But I never thought that the 21% would vote for the MAS. That's also something to state it clearly. That's one point. Once it happened, the next day, everybody, well, not everybody, a good amount of people in Santa Cruz, as you mentioned, started raising the flag, for the red flag, saying there has been a fraud here. A fraud has been committed, and it's a widespread fraud. But there were no evidences that supported that theory. All these people just ended up making a big ridiculous scene, and it was pretty bad for the Comité Cívico de Santa Cruz, because that's an institution, and the institution should be very careful about making assertions of that dimension. They were not careful at the beginning. After they saw that they were being absolutely irrational, the president sort of withheld and said, you know, until we have something overwhelming, we're not going to say that there was a fraud. But their situation is very weak still up to today. But when we speak about fraud, there's something that I have to mention it, because I don't know if there has been fraud, or to the dimension of what there was. Okay, let's put it this way. I don't think there was a fraud orchestrated from the electoral tribune. I don't think that. I don't think that the tribune and the MAS coalesced in some form of conspiracy in order for there to appear thousands
to alter the votes.
I don't think that happened. But what I presume happened, I don't know how big this is that the voters registry in Bolivia has never been revealed to the political parties. And it had to be revealed, because it happens everywhere in the world. In the US, and this is something I studied, that's why I mentioned it here. In the US, all 50 states have different laws. But basically what happens in the US is that the registry is available for the political parties. They give it to them for free, but they also sell it. If there's a private individual or a private corporation that wants to buy the registry, they can purchase it for a price. Political parties get it for free. Any other person gets it for money. But as we mentioned before, in the States, they're very careful with the information. Basically, what I've seen, the big discussion in the States is not whether you give it or not. You know, you have to give the registry. But what information do you give? Yeah, what information shall we release, protecting our citizenship? And what they do is basically it's an agreement, that it's an implied agreement. Nobody sat in the U.S. and thought about it, and the 50 states decided. But there's an implied agreement that there are two pieces of information that are definitely not confidential. Your name, because come on, everybody goes and votes the poll, so they see you. They see that Paul is going to vote. That's not a secret. You cannot hide yourself with a mask and go and vote because it's supposed to be a secret. No, you just go and vote, and everybody knows that you're voting there. So that's not a secret. The identity of somebody that is registered for voting cannot be considered confidential information. That's shown. And the other piece of information that is shown in all 50 states is your address, because your address cannot be considered a secret. You know, anybody that knows where you live, they can just follow you and see where you live. That's at the end of the ride. They'll know, oh, that's his house. That's it. You know, you cannot hide where you live. And yesterday I was speaking. Now I returned to Bolivia. I had to make a call to 104 to Cotas for another reason, because I was looking for another piece of information. But then I asked the girl, you know, because I wondered whether there was still a phone book in Santa Cruz. I hadn't seen a phone book in years, you know. And I asked her, and she said, yeah, there is a phone book. She told me, you know, there is a phone book, except that it hasn't been made in the last year, but not as a result of anything. It was I think it's a result, she said, I don't know if it's a pandemic or something, but basically there is a phone book. And I asked her, you know, what they published, because I had already forgotten, you know. And she says, we publish the name, the telephone number, and the address of the person. So definitely your address cannot be considered confidential in historical terms, because that's an old,
there's precedent.
The phone book is an old piece of document that goes around all throughout the world. So see, my point is that the tribunal, the electoral tribunal, cannot withhold that information. It had to be given to the political parties, at least to the political parties, so the political parties could revise that, could review it, and see if there were any problems. I was at a meeting, I told you before, with the tribunal, and they were just closed in terms of opening up the possibility. One of the arguments was the confidentiality of the information, to which I exposed them what you just heard, and another argument, which was not put forth by a member of the tribunal, but one of the guys that was there, that actually works for an NGO. He said that, oh, if the tribunal shows the registry, then people will know that there are 30 or 40 people that have one same name in Bolivia, because there are some last names like Mamani that are reproduced all over the place, and then that'll become an issue. Well, that wasn't a convincing argument, because so what? You know, if there are 30 people that are called John Mamani, then all you have to do is check if John Mamani is really 30 persons or one person. So that would be the end of the deal. But
it would be strange. It would be strange if they all spelled John the same way.
Right.
J-H-O-N or J-O-H-N.
Right.
I'm going to make it.
And in Bolivia, you have two last names, right? You have Mamani and something else. So it's sort of difficult to see that a person would have both last names. Equal 30 persons would do that in Bolivia. That I find hard to believe. But despite of that, the end of result is they never showed it. My feeling is that, I have a client that his company has worked in the Chapare for a while. I provide legal services to this company, and so I was talking to him during this week, and he told me something that I had heard before, but I wasn't sure. But see, he works there; he knows the place very good, and he said, "Oh, but at the Chapare, it's absolutely normal." He said, "People have 2 or 3 carnet de identidad. One for this, one for, they use it for different purposes." Yes. And he told me, no, but in the Chapare, that's normal, he said.
With what? Different ID cards with the same name or different names? But with different names or the same?
That he didn't explain, because I'm sure that he probably even doesn't know that. But he did see people that's a normal thing in the Chapare for people to have more than one ID card. I have heard that before, but never from somebody that is within the Chapare a lot of the time of his life. This guy doesn't live there, but he works there at different periods of time. So he told me that, and that was very interesting, because if that's true in the Chapare, and Evo knows that, why couldn't it be true in other rural areas of Bolivia where Masistas are the majority? So my feeling is that if the people in the tribunal don't want to show the registry, something wrong is with the registry. And I presume that there's a lot of this going on. My question is, would that amount to a 20% distance between the first and the second one? It's hard to know that. I don't think so, because that's just too much, right? But my feeling is that one day we'll know the truth. Well, maybe never, but if we ever discover that this voters registry has that type of problems, then that's going to be a show in Bolivia.
Going into that point that you just made about how many people could have different ID cards and vote more than once. I saw an interesting question raised the other day, and I don't know, again, I'm not a statistician and I didn't look into it, but there's 7,340,000 roughly registered voters in Bolivia, in a population of 11 million, right?
Right.
And somebody I saw this on Facebook or something, and somebody said, does anybody know if that's a normal percentage in terms of it seems like a high number, right? Of registered voters. When you look at that's basically almost 3/4, 70%, let's say. It's an interesting question, and I think be interesting to look at. Although I guess what you also have to consider is that in Bolivia, to be a registered voter, basically, everybody over 18 is basically a registered voter. Right. Whereas in the States and probably a bunch of other countries, you actually have to register to vote, even though it's at least in the States, it's an extremely simple process. Whereas in Bolivia, basically the day you turn 18, although I could be wrong in that. Maybe you do have to. I haven't registered in so long. I still vote in an address I haven't used in 10 years. But the point being that it seems kind of like a high number, that you're basically saying 70% of the population is 18 or older. Right. But I don't know. That's just a.
No, I think I've read that position too. It was exposed by some people, and it seems reasonable. But again, we're not statisticians, so we cannot pronounce ourselves definitely on that issue. The point is that it seems that there's something to ponder about, something to research about, and if there is such a thing as an overwhelmingly number of people registered twice or 3 times, then of course we are under an acute situation, a situation that has to be corrected in the Bolivian voting registry so that the system works better. But still the distance is too big. That's why I don't think people pay attention to all these observations that one does, because I've published this in Facebook, and nobody really cares too much about this because they know that the difference is so big between Tomás and Carlos Mesa that who bothers about the arguments that you make, because it seems like you're making an argument in order to I don't know, take the value out of the Masa political victory.
Just to be clear, it's a 26%. It's a 26-point difference. It's not.
Yeah, even if there is people that voted 3 times or 2 times, that won't be erased. The distance is too big. The political message is too strong. And with this said, I go to my second point, which is a very simple point. I've made it before many times, but in Bolivia, for some reason, simple things don't tend to be understood easily. Yeah, in Bolivia, we tend to be very complicated, and in order for a theory to be heard, you have to have a theory that's very complex, so people put, oh, he's saying something interesting,
Well, case in point, the people who are more ready to believe that there was election fraud than that the MAS won for other reasons. I mean, usually the simplest explanation to a problem is the correct one, right? That's what they say.
Right. So they like to be complex. This is part of the idiosyncrasy of Bolivians, or I think Latin Americans. We like these thick theories, that are very complex. And then people think, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about, you know. But sometimes not even the speaker knows what he's talking about. It's so complex, the issue, that, you know, he's lost in his own complexity. But that's not the point here. The point is that really there's something very simple. And I have read it last night out of a political scientist that's from La Paz. And I celebrated so immensely that he wrote it that way he wrote it, you know. He said, and you know that I believe that, you know, he said, there's something very simple in this whole thing that people, especially the right, doesn't understand, you know. It's racism, you know. We have a racist political system. Probably, I don't know, I can't speak about the world because the world is too big. But I don't know too many places where racism is the basis of the political division, you know. What we're seeing in Bolivia right now is exactly that. Nobody cares about the right and the left. That's a lie. That's a big lie. Especially because the Masistas are not leftists, man. Don't tell me that the Chapare people are leftists.
It's a rhetoric they employ because they can't they can't come out and say that, you know, the indigenous versus the white.
Right. It's part of the hypocrisy is that, you know, they cannot go and say, hey, you know, we are the Indians and these other guys are the non-Indians. That's not going to happen. So what they say is we're the revolution. We are Marxists, Leninists, and Mao is our figure here. But see, that's not the real reason is racism. But once you realize that it's racism, and I think that's, if it's not said clearly, I think it is understood. You know, people don't say things because they think that's politically unpolite or non-political. It's not right to say things like that.
Yeah.
But even if it's non-political to say, people can imagine that that's true, and I think they do imagine. That's the problem. If politicians think that this is the truth, and they probably do, all of them, I think most of them understand that this is the problem in Bolivia. Once you have diagnosed the problem, Paul, you should be able to overcome it. You know, you should take some measures in order to overcome it. But because if you don't, it's like alcoholism, right? First, you have to understand and accept that you're an alcoholic. Then you've taken the first step of the whole process. Once you know you're alcoholic, come on, you know, you have to do something about it. But while you don't recognize you're alcoholic, forget it. You know, nobody can convince you of not drinking because you're not an alcoholic. Just keep drinking the whole day. I'm not an alcoholic. This is a family gathering, so salud, and then in the afternoon we're celebrating because we sold so much amount during the day, so salud. So that's alcoholic's life. But once you realize you're an alcoholic and you stop it, at least you realize you diagnose the problem good. In Bolivia, I think the politicians have to know that the problem is racial, but what they don't know is how to overcome it. Because somebody wrote today, and that was very interesting, you know, about Mesa's campaign. And the guy today said, you know, Mesa never crossed the road. You know, he never crossed across the street.
There was a point I was going to make at the beginning that I forgot to. He was very he was incapable of doing that. You know, he just narrowly spoke to and directed himself towards the urban bases that we're going to vote for him anyway, and didn't broaden his
non-politically speaking
target.
He speaks to the white Bolivians, you know. That's his, and he doesn't realize it. He has to realize that because he's a smart guy, you know. But he doesn't do anything to cross over the river and say, hey, you know, I have to speak to the indigenous people of Bolivia because they are the majority of the voters. If I don't get their vote, I'm done. And he was done, you know. And that's something that I cannot understand, because it has to be part of a strategy if you get in politics. If you get in politics and you don't, for example, I think this is a good example, the case of Tuto. Tuto realizes it. He realizes so good, you know, because he's a smart guy, of course, you know. And he chooses his vice presidential candidate, an indigenous woman. That he is the only one that chose but it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's not that way, you know. It's like Trump in the States, you know. He has all these blacks that go around saying, hey, you know, Trump is not racist. Well, it doesn't make a change because nobody believes it to him, you know. There can be I don't know, a handful of black people in the States saying that Trump is such a good guy, you know, and people don't believe that because they know that it's a lie. They know that maybe he pays this guy's money or whatever, but it's not a truthful statement, you know. The same happened with Tuto, you know, he picks his as his the vice presidential candidate, a woman, an indigenous woman. Nobody believes what he does, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody believes because they know that he can't be for real, you know. He's just doing that for a political purpose. And when you're not for real, people realize you're not for real. Yeah. So the reaction is just, nah, this is just a political posture.
Well,
so,
you can look at it with Áñez and Tata Quispe, giving him a ministry, and Camacho and Pumardi is the there you go.
There you go. People don't believe that.
And everybody knows it. Everybody knows it.
Everybody knows, but they are not doing enough. I don't know what's enough.
Here's my theory, and you make an excellent point. Here's the way I try to make sense of it, is that, like I said, Mesa's going to get those votes, you know, the urban paseño vote, let's say, no matter what, you know.
Right.
But when a candidate shifts his focus towards, just look at this, Mesa in a lot of his policy terms or proposals was very similar to what the MAS was proposing, right?
Right, exactly.
And so in an ideology, there was a similarity, right? I guess you're in policy anyway. And he was getting attacked for it. A lot of, you know, the Camachistas and other candidates, even Tuto, were attacking Mesa, saying, look, Mesa's just a masista with you know, that's more eloquent and wears a tie, right? That's and so when Mesa or any candidate goes and tries to penetrate those sectors and be in contact with the periphery, if you want to say, or the rural populations, the same kind of thing is going to happen. Nobody's going to come out and blatantly say, look, you know, Mesa's an Indian lover. You know, they're not going to say that. It sounds awful, right? You know,
right.
And you know you're a terrible person for saying something like that. But it's the same as it. But they're thinking it, and they're going to vote accordingly, right? And so the same thing when people say, look at Mesa's policies. His policies are masista. So you know, they don't have to say it, but in their heads, that's what they're thinking, right? And so I think that's what it comes down to. These candidates, they're conscious of the concept or like what you said, what the issue or the problem is, but they're afraid to try and fix it because they're afraid it's going to take away votes from their base. Because whether we like it or not, a lot of people within those bases are still anti-indigenous or racista or clasista or whatever you want to call them, and it's going to affect the vote within their base. The same thing if Arce wanted to go and start mingling in the Comité Cívico or in the Club Social de la Plaza 24 here and they're going to call him, what do you call it? What's that word they use for a traitor in the indigenous language? The same thing would happen, right? And so that's what I think it comes down to. And it's a tough one to fix, you know.
No, very tough one, because if you don't want to be a traitor with your base, then you're condemned to lose all the elections that you're going to, because your base is smaller than the base of the MAS.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what it comes down to is that the candidate's afraid to lose. It's going to be easier for the candidate to lose votes within his base than it is going to be for him or her to pick up votes from those areas where normally they wouldn't get them, right? So
right.
It's a tough one.
That is a very tough one. I don't know what to say because I don't know what to propose, but that's the diagnosis. The problem is what to do about this. The political party that I belonged to, which is no longer a real political party, it's just a political party in name right now, the MNR, was the first chapter of the MAS, because that's the first party that made the agrarian reform. And the MNR was known for winning all the elections in the elections in the 50s and the 60s overwhelmingly, just like the MAS. The only difference well, there were two differences with the MAS, is the leaders were not Indians. The leaders were quote unquote white Bolivians, middle class Bolivians, Victor Paz Tensoro. And number two, the ideology was not a racist ideology in terms of Indians against whites. It was the unification of all Bolivians, which was, it's a whole different concept, right? But it was very inclusive, because the unification in terms of the Indians here and also you guys that are not Indians, right? And the MNR really was almost a monopoly in politics until the military took over in 1964. And then when the coup d'etat ended in 1978, the MNR returned, and in a different fashion, it was still dominant, because there was another leader, which was Siles Suazo, and he had part of the MNR was with him, and he was still overwhelming a majority in Bolivia. I don't think those guys thought too much about what they did, really. I'm not taking any merit from them, but I don't think they really sat and thought about the strategy. It just happened, It just happened that, and I was thinking about this, believe me, because before I say this, when they took over in 1952, then they wrote the agrarian reform decree, which was approved the next year in 1953. Since that moment, they never lost an election, because it gave the indigenous people the right to the land, and the right to the land was too much of an edge against any other political party. So the faithfulness of the indigenous people with the MNR, I think, started crystallizing itself through that decree, through that law, and it never left them, because the indigenous voter was very, very loyal to the MNR until the 1980s. Because in the 1980s, the MNR changed, because the world changed. Remember, the Iron Curtain no longer, and all the left went down, and the world, not only in Bolivia, and then the left didn't have a place in the political spectrum, and the MNR sought what every other party that had the sensibility to keep in being in politics concluded. It's to be a neoliberal or a liberal policy. So that's what the MNR did, and that's the moment it broke off the pact, the agreement with the indigenous people. When the MNR became a liberal political party, it broke its alliance with the indigenous people, and that's when the indigenous people didn't have a political party to support. The MNR was not there, so there were one or two other political parties that started doing campaign with indigenous people. Never had success until the MAS got into the picture, and the MAS is the successor of the MNR in some way. But as I told you before, I don't think the MNR ever, the guys in 1953, I don't think they planned it that way. I think it just happened that way. They had to do the agrarian reform. They wrote the law, they approved the law, and from that day on, they had all this alliance with the indigenous people that never broke off until the 80s. And now I think the alliance is signed with the MAS, and for some strange reason, nobody else can get into that alliance. It's like a prohibited group of people, majority of people. And if that is not resolved by the opposition of the MAS, then the MAS will stay in power for many more years or many more decades, I guess, because if you don't, this is a democracy, you like it or not, you go to the polls, and if there's no fraud, then they're going to win, because they're such a majority. So it's a big challenge. I think that in the 21st century, now that we have a lot of technology, we have a lot of experience in politics, there's comparative politics to read, not only from Bolivia, from other Latin American countries, from other countries throughout the world. I think that something has to be thought out in Bolivia in order to break that monopoly of the political spectrum that has the MAS right now. Not because, well, essentially because it's non-democratic. You know, when you have such a monopoly, like in business, you know, come on, you have to break it, because otherwise this company will
They
end
got
up.
hegemony. Well, look what happened with Evo.
Right.
They just, you know, they took over everything, and
Right.
that's not healthy in any sense.
And this leads to the third point, which you touched, and I think that it's important to delve upon it. What's going to happen with Arce in government?
Yeah,
Arce is the president. Arce is the president, definitely. He is. Nobody can question that. He won. Yes, he won. The question is, did he win? Did he really win? I'm not sure about that. What I'm sure about is that Evo doesn't think that Arce won. I'm certain about that. I haven't spoken with Evo, but I'm just, I know what, I presume what he thinks is that all that vote is Evo's vote. It's not Arce's vote.
Yeah.
And my feeling is that he's right. Because if there was no MAS, or this Mr. Arce would not get one vote. I think he would be just another guy like I don't know if like Mesa, but similar to that, you know.
Well, that's what. Sorry to cut you off, but that I would disagree there. I mean, the lesson I took away from this is that the MAS, there were a lot of people that believe that Evo was the MAS, and that's probably something we said more than once here in the program. That the MAS doesn't exist without Evo Morales, or if Evo Morales dies tomorrow, then the MAS is just going to disintegrate and fall apart. But I think this result, at least from my perspective, shows the contrary. That the MAS has become a political force that isn't dependent on the cult of personality. And Evo is this figurehead, and that at this point he's doing the party more harm than good by trying to get involved. That's the way I read it. You know, if you look at the analysis of last year's election, and with the people that break down the fraud, that according to them it gave Evo about a 2.5 point, you know, boost. That would put Evo at about 42 or 43% in last year's election. Arce just took 55.
Yeah.
How do you explain that? With the tens of millions of dollars that the MAS was spending from you know, state money on the campaign, coercing votes from people in the public sector. Arce didn't have any of that. At least I don't think he did. Yet the way I put it is Arce beat Evo by 13%. And so that's why I say that that's my take on it, is that at this point Evo's doing more harm than good even within his own party, and that's the way I look at it. Arce has a challenge, that's for sure, in trying to shake off the ghost of Evo, or Evo's shadow, you know, over him. But Evo's going to be a pain in the ass for those that don't want him around, and for those that kind of want him around. You know, so I guess the question you were asking was, Arce won, but did he really? My opinion is that he won in spite of Evo, and not because of Evo.
Okay. See, this is the question. That's why I put it on the table, because this has to be resolved in the next years to come, because it won't be resolved easily. My feeling is that, for example, to be more pragmatic and to the point, I know it's hard to conceptualize from Santa Cruz, but if you would go right now to the regions where the MAS got most of the votes, which is the rural areas, Not only the rural areas where they don't speak Spanish. Exactly that, If you go to the rural areas in La Paz or in Oruro or in Cochabamba, and you speak to those guys there who are they're people that live off the land. They're agriculture, basically. I don't know how many of them speak Spanish or don't. I'm not too certain about that. My catch is that many of them don't speak it every day.
It's their first language.
They may be acquainted with Spanish, but in their daily businesses, they probably don't speak Spanish because they don't have to speak Spanish. In their communities, they speak Aymara or Quechua. So my feeling is that although this is modern times and there's a lot of internet and a lot of TV and stuff, basically these people are very estranged from modernity, from the city, and they're very ostracized from the political maneuvering of the cities. That's also why they always vote for the MAS, only for the MAS, because they don't have all the information. My feeling is these guys don't know who Arce is, or if they know, they just know it because they told them that they have to vote for the MAS and that they have to put the cross where the face of this guy was. I don't think they really know exactly. I don't think they have the bond with him. I don't think they are Arce people. Because they don't probably know too much about him. They probably know that he was a minister during Evo's years in government, but my feeling is that no, they're not Arceistas, and I don't think they reasoned so profoundly on the fact that now we need a change because Evo's in problems with all these accusations, and we better have a different leader, cleaner to the public opinion. The typical voter for the MAS in the rural areas is probably, my take is that is not making that process of thought. I think that these people are basically Evo people, and that's it, and they'll do whatever Evo says they have to do. If Evo says vote for Arce, they'll vote for Arce, and they did vote for Arce. Evo knows that because he knows that better than us because he's with them all the time, and Arce knows that. That's the problem. And when they collide, because they will collide, Evo wants there to be a collision because Evo is a political animal and he wants to state very clearly that this was his victory, not anybody else's victory. And in order to do that, he will have to show to the country, if possible to the world, that the person that leads,
still in charge.
The person that takes the decision in Bolivia is him, not the other guy. And I don't know, sooner than later, I think he'll put forth the issues that are going to be the divisive issues. For example, I think he's going to be absolutely merciless with the police guys that treasoned him last year. I think he'll say, hey, you have to get these guys in jail.
Evo or Arce?
Evo.
Okay.
Evo will probably say, hey, you have to put in jail to this policeman that betrayed us last year. Because they're right now, they're in freedom. They're doing their job. They're police people. I'm talking about the commanders, the commander from Santa Cruz, the commander from Cochabamba, that all of them rebelled against Evo Morales. I don't think Evo is going to think twice about initiating processes for them. And that's persecution. That's a way of persecution.
Sure.
And I think he'll instruct Arce in order to do that. If this happens and Arce abides by this, then who's in charge? Because the first thing that Arce said in public was that he was going to be a unity guy, a president of unity, all Bolivians with me, from the right, from the left, Indians, not Indians, everybody. But when you start initiating judicial process against these guys, then you're no longer that, because that is definitely a political move. That is not showing the cohesion among Bolivians, because once you start suing these people, they have family, they have, and also, I don't think that Evo is going to stop with the policeman. He's going to say, hey, you have to start a process against Camacho and all these guys, and then we'll have a problem there. My take is that, and I think that's going to be interesting from an analyst political point of view, not from a citizen. From a citizen, this is just abhorring, you know. But I think from an a political analyst point of view, this is going to be interesting because the big squirrels in Bolivia are not going to be with the opposition. The big political misunderstanding, squirrels and divisions are going to be within the MAS, basically with the hardcore people from that are loyal to Evo and the people that will be in government that are probably, most of them will be the same type of people that is Arce, people that have an education, people that are more rational in their decision-making process, that are not as politicized. Yeah, they're going to be this middle-class people that have an education and are going to take those posts and are not going to face the next 5 years with only a political perspective, whereas Evo is going to have only a political perspective.
And they're definitely obligated. That's another important.
Exactly.
Arce isn't coming into office in the same position the country was in that Evo had in 2005 to 2006.
Yeah.
Totally different scenario. And so
totally
Arce's got his hands full with an economic crisis, you know, in a health crisis.
Yeah.
And
yes.
And so I'd like to give him the benefit of the doubt, you know, based on his preliminary statements about what his intentions are and what he's going to do and how he's going to govern and blah blah blah. That being said, Evo, I understand what you say, and I tend to agree with you, but I do question how much pull he has, because the forces that got Evo out of office last year were not rural, or, you know, it was definitely in the urban centers, right?
Right.
You know, all the major cities shut down. And if there was any counter protest, and, you know, it was very isolated to certain spots of the Chapare, Yapacani, in El Alto, and I want to say there's a third one, but I can't remember. But anyway, point being that
very interesting what you're saying, because then he will become the leader of the middle class, the urban middle classes, Arce.
Yeah, I want to say, and I want to say that the urban middle class is willing to give him a chance. You know, yeah, sure. what choice do we have? You know.
All right. Exactly.
So
exactly. But there's the discrepancy is going to be there within the MAS, not outside, because I think that Carlos Mesa doesn't have the physical strength to do anything politically. I think he's just lost. He has lost the election, and I think he's lost the political pull that he had in this country. If he ever had a political pull, but I don't think he's going to be much an opposition guy. And with regard to the guy from Santa Cruz, I don't think he has either the political muscle to do that. You know, he's basically a local leader, you know, Camacho, and I don't think he's.
It's regional.
Yeah, the dispute is going to be within the MAS, and I think you put it very, very interesting, because the president is going to end up being the leader of the middle class, urban middle class, and Evo Morales will remain being the big leader of the indigenous people in the rural areas. So this collision may show that way, and it's going to be very interesting, because the intelligent thing to do for them will be not to fight and to get into an agreement, and that's probably where they're going to head all this process. But still, it's not going to be an easy process, because Evo Morales, we know him. He's a vengeful person. He knows vendetta. He wouldn't have been born in the Bolivian Altiplano. He would have been born in Sicily, because he definitely understands the omerta and the vendetta. You know, he's like that. He likes to fight with people, and you know, he has never been the agreement guy and shake hands guy. You know, I don't think I've ever seen him shake hands with anybody, because he's not able to do that with anybody. You know. Now that's interesting. Having said that, I go to the next point. His trip. This is just, of course.
Go ahead.
You tell me. Okay. And well, the last point that I would like to make at this opportunity is the following.
why his trip, right? Why is he going to? But this is highly speculative. But again, this type of program is just for, it gives way to speculation. And
Sure.
let's see
it's part of the fun.
Yeah. I definitely think that he's a good strategist, Evo, and he is a politician like very few there are in Bolivia. My take is that he is going to Venezuela because in the coming days we have the posesión of Mr. Arce as president of Bolivia.
November 8th.
Yeah, November 8th, and I know that all the presidents will come, especially the president from the left wing in Latin America. But it's a whole different issue if you go and you bring Maduro by the hand, and you bring Fernandez on the other hand, and all together come to Bolivia. I think he's doing that, and I think that's very intelligent because he's such a perceptive guy, you know, that he probably realizes. And we'll see this in the near future. He probably realizes that there's a vacuum in Latin America on the left. With the death of Chavez, nobody took over. Maduro does not have the leadership in order to become the leader of the left in Latin America because his personal traits are not that way. He's not.
He's like a mob boss, man.
Yeah, exactly. You know, he's not the leader there, and I don't think that Fernandez is either president from Argentina,
especially with the crisis there. Yeah, Argentina's not doing so.
Yeah, and he doesn't seem to have that profile either. You know. Definitely not the guy from Nicaragua, because Nicaragua, that is a country in problems. And he probably would have been the right guy to be the leader of the left, because in terms of seniority, it's him. He's been around since the 80s, and he was the protagonist of the revolution, of the Nicaraguan revolution, and so on and so forth. But he has such a big problems in that country that I think he's just he doesn't have the time to be showing off in the rest of the world. And I think that also his personality is not according to an international leader. He's an introspect guy, you know. He's a good leader, but he's an introspect, you know. He doesn't speak too much. My feeling is that Evo Morales is probably tempting to be a sort of a leader. He'll probably play it by ear, as he usually does things, and see how it works. And if he sees that it works, he'll become that, you know. I think he's playing his cards in that direction, to be the man that can talk with this guy, with this other guy, bring them together, plan together, do things together as a team, as they were before, like 10 years ago. This hasn't been happening lately, and I think that there's room for leadership in America.
No, if you look at UNASUR and the way it's just, you know, deflated and falling apart. And that's one of the things that's one of the things Evo said. Evo said it, not Arce, that I don't know what you call it. I don't want to say the rebirth, but the rise again of UNASUR is part of the plan, right? So you make an interesting point.
That coincides with this. Yeah, he's thinking on those terms. And that's interesting, because if he does that role, then he will be less involved in the political internal squabbles in Bolivia.
Squabbles, yeah. It's a very good point. Interesting theory.
Yeah, and that bounces inside Bolivia. Once you're an international leader, that has an effect within Bolivia, because people say, oh, you know, Evo is the man of the universe. So let's see what happens. But that's my take. I think that has to do with his trip to Venezuela. Sure. I think his plan is to bring these two guys, or maybe more than two guys, on each arm, and then get to Bolivia on the 8th and be in the possession of Mr. Arce. And then
I guess you just answered the last question I was going to give you before we wrap this up. You think Evo's going to be here for?
Oh yeah, no question. Yes, he'll be here on the 8th. Yeah, he has to be here on the 8th.
Why do you think he hasn't come back sooner?
Because he wants to come back on the right moment, and the right moment is when they take over, government. I know that if he goes inside right now in Bolivia, I don't think they can they can put him in jail because of who he is. Basically, you know, he's such a big leader that nobody would lock him down in jail and in Positos or wherever, you know, and the board. No, that won't happen. But I don't think he's worried about that. He's just worried about coming at the right moment, and the right moment to come is on the taking of possession of the new president, which is on the 8th, and he'll come with all these international leaders and really make a boom in the country. You know, he's quite a strategist, and that's what he has been in his whole life. He never went to Westminster College and shows what he does in politics, and he's probably making the strategy at this moment, and successful, because this was too quick. 1 year is nothing, you know. 1 year is really nothing, you know. And the masses recovered in 1 year. We'll keep on talking about this issue because this is not the end of our conversation with regard to this issue. This is the first chapter of our conversation with regard to this issue. This will bring many more conversations in order for us to analyze the situation in Bolivia. Well, Paul, it has been great. It's always great to speak with you and to share all this analysis about Bolivia and where we're going. I think it's an interesting moment in Bolivian history, and I think it's an interesting moment because I think that I hope that things in Bolivia, within Bolivia, will not go as bad as many people think will go, especially people on the right. And I think that, again, Bolivia will be in the news, you know, because Evo Morales tends to put Bolivia in the spectrum of the news.
Yeah, but
it's also interesting, yeah.
I hope it's for the right reasons or for good reasons, at least, you know. I'll say what I said at the beginning. I'm cautiously, I'm hopeful. I'm not going to say I'm optimistic at this point, but I'm hopeful. And my personal view on this is things are not as bad as a lot of people who aren't so fond of the MAS might think, you know. So we'll see. Arce has definitely got a lot on his plate. But if I had to pick somebody from that side of the court, let's say, to take the reins right now, I think he's probably the best we could hope for in that sense.
Yeah. And he understands economics very good.
Exactly. Yes, sir.
Few presidents in the world understand economics very good. Few. Most of them are just leaders, you know. And now we have an economist, you know, trained economist, and that's very important because he does know what he's doing. I'm certain of that. We may not agree with some of his positions, but he understands that when he raises his right hand, things will go that way, or, you know, he knows what he's doing exactly, you know. And he's a monetarist because that's his specialization. He will try to as he has always done. He manages the economic phenomenon with money. You know, he releases money or contracts money, supply, and that's what he has been doing 14 years, and he's been good at that. And let's hope for the good of Bolivia that he does that too in the next 5 years, definitely. Yep.
All right. Well, until next week.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend. Keep taking care.
Take it easy. Bye-bye.